Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the Minister outline to the House how affordable and reliable energy supports Australian exports? How would alternative approaches jeopardise the prosperity of hard-working Australian exporters and energy reliability?
The Minister for Trade and Investment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for O'Connor for the question, because, like all those on this side of the House, I know he's passionate about boosting Australian job opportunities by growing our export sector. And he's right. The fact is that Australian exports have flourished under this coalition government. And they flourished because it's the coalition government that's put in place 3 powerhouse free trade agreements with key North Asian markets like South Korea, Japan and China. And in fact, Mr Speaker, the value of Australia's exports reached some $32.6 billion in December, the highest level ever in our nation's history. And in fact, it resulted in a record export performance of a trade surplus of some $3.5 billion, which also is in fact the largest that was ever recorded. Over 2015-16, our net exports contributed to over half of Australia's economic growth, in contributing some 1.4% out of a growth rate of some 2.7%. So what these results show is a clear vindication of this government's efforts with respect to pursuing trade agreements that are good for Australia, good for Australian workers, and of course will also be good for Australian wages. In large part, our export exports have been driven by increased services exports and large increases in Australian energy exports of LNG and coal. Now, this is the same LNG and coal sector that provides the low-cost energy that's critical to Australia retaining its export competitiveness. And so, while Australia is the world's biggest coal exporter, with exports expected to be around $58 billion in 2016-17, according to the Minerals Council, we want to make sure as a government that government policy is committed to ensuring continued growth in the sector and continued jobs. So you'd expect, with that growth in the sector, that the Labor Party might be a little bit more committed to it. You'd expect that the Leader of the Opposition, for example, would be a little bit more focused on backing clean coal technologies like those on this side of the chamber are. But the problem is that the Leader of the Opposition doesn't care about coal miners. He doesn't care about those regional communities. In fact, he's more concerned about kale than he is about coal. That's what his focus is. His focus is about what he can do for those that would rather eat kale in the inner cities than what it is he can do about coal miners in regional Australia. The fact is that Australians can see straight through this Leader of the Opposition. They know a phony when they see one. And let me tell you, Mr Speaker, they can always spot a counterfeit bill. They can spot a counterfeit bill from a long way away. And when you look through a magnifying glass, what they can see about the opposition is that they have failed policies that aren't good for Australian workers, and they'll turn their back on our trade and export agenda.